What I'm reading is I'm a prose writer, and so I'm working on a book, and a little bit of a setup. It's a standalone chapter in it, and it should just all fit together, but a little bit of setup will be helpful. So here it is. The book is called, it's called The Advanced Man, and it's set in July 1979 in eastern Iowa. The narrator's a guy named Bam Parsons, and he's kind of a small, smooth-talking scoundrel of sorts. And he's crash-landed into a little town called Millerton. He's beaten, broken, alone, a little bit of drift, and he hits on an idea of inventing a circus. Stupid idea, but it's something the townies can get behind and maybe even sponsor. And if he does it right, he can take some money and run. So he's insinuated himself with the leading citizens of town, and he's good. The good times are rolling pretty well. He's also got a crush on the girl next door, and he's played it quite poorly, nonetheless. But the townies are a trusting lot, and they don't trust him yet. But they do what good Iowans do, and that's invite him to Sunday church. And so that's where we're going to go. We're going to go to Sunday Methodist Church in small town Iowa. So and here it is, The Advanced Man. I think everything else should make sense in context. If not, hopefully it will. Okay, here it goes. So, everyone wants to be loved, but we don't want to be loved for what we've achieved or what we possess or how we look. We want to be loved for who we are, just as we are, no strings attached. With the spirit of love nestled in my breast, I came down from my room and met Roger outside the hotel. The morning was balmy. Roger's fat brown Buick was dressed in a coat of high-gloss wax, and the big man himself was scrubbed to his Sunday best. I got in while saying my hellos, and the greeting I received was infused with goodwill and the scent of talcum and aftershave. And away we went. Instead of going directly to church, however, he took me on a scenic route through town. Windows down, his hand extended and knuckles pointing, he showed me the riverfront. Together we admired the rusted bridge that stretched high into the morning haze. As for the battered docks and the co-op towers, with a hopeful patter he admitted to their neglected states. Then he encouraged me to look down at the roadway itself. Though crumbly, it was wide and easy. It was designed to handle heavy and oversized vehicles, he assured me, and the very sort that a traveling circus would need. He was making a sales pitch, and I admired him for his honest approach. Past the gnarled riverette bars, a touch farther downstream, he pointed out the barge where they launched the city fireworks display, telling me it was still made up and ready to go after the 4th of July rainout. And then we idled past a ballpark that sat hauntingly empty, its wide-hanging grandstand set to take an admiring view of the mighty Mississippi, and then we were tooling along the edges of the shabby fairgrounds where my circuits would pitch his big top. Roger eased the Buick to the shoulder. The river was wide and lazy along the road that slipped down into cornfields, climbed a bluff, and vanished to wander an unbroken path that would touch every muddy berg all the way down to St. Louis. As for the fairgrounds, Roger outlined the reasons for the broken buildings and ruined fences. The simple truth was that the folks at Millerton were too tight to refurbish what they had, much less buy new. The money was there, but they had gotten used to making do. There's real danger in neglect, he said. Decay has this corrosive power to demoralize, like a stalking devil that creeps up too slow to be noticed. If not repaired, in a few seasons the fraying fairgrounds would become unusable. A few seasons after that, the docks would become too broken to receive traffic. Farmers would take their harvest elsewhere. The mudfish would move along to another ballpark, in another town, and assume another name. The fire station would become outdated. The River King Hotel would fall into disrepair and would become a fire trap, as would the movie house and bowling alley. Condemned places don't come back, and folks would begin to move away. The neighborhoods would become blighted. Cornerstone operations like the Mercantile Bank and the Co-op and the Hy-Vee would shutter. And just like that, Millerton would be a ruin. A dispiriting funk threatened to settle upon us, but on our return to downtown, Roger began to brighten his tune. He reported that despite the rundown look of things, the people themselves were a good lot. The vast majority of the responses from the police and fire crews were those to aid those in distress. They straightened fender benders, made ambulance runs, tracked down lost pets, corralled livestock. Sure, there was the occasional fire and accident, and that's life. Sure, there was the occasional bar brawl down at the docks, but transient working men and mean drunks are trouble everywhere. But when folks went on vacation, they left their front doors unlocked. They had yet to talk a jumper off the bridge, and they hadn't dragged the river for a body in ages. Together we looked past the decaying edifices as he showed me a future of gleaming new silos and docks, shops overflowing with goods, sidewalks teeming with citizens, their chins up with pride. Roger was a plain-spoken fabulist, and his vision was that of a sober man engaged in honest labor, a working man dedicated to preserving his home ground, a volunteer fire chief who had vowed to risk his own life to rescue his neighbor if the call came. We rolled out of the downtown and pushed uphill to the genteel cobbled streets of the bluff. The church, nestled deep in its stately neighborhood, was made of a solid old brick, capped with pitched roof lines and adorned with tall arched windows. A mighty steeple anchored a corner, and spreading stairs flowed down from it to the sidewalk. It was a church you went to if your God was a mighty eternal force and you needed a place of refuge from his wrath. It seemed a compelling God because a multitude of well-dressed folks were milling about on the steps. Roger parked curbside in a conspicuous spot, and shoulder to shoulder we entered into a curious throng that seemed to be waiting for us. Roger brokered the introductions with a disorienting tempo. Some were fast and furtive, others were lingering and considered. I was confronted by a collage of men and women of all shapes and sizes, children and cousins, and mothers and brothers and fathers and nephews and nieces and sisters and babies and old folks, and on it went. The family relations were straightforward enough, though the details were like jumbled pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. I focused on the Stedford clan, Roger's family, and did my best. Ed Ralston, the mayor himself, had married Ruth Bennett, who was Carol's sister, and their brother Tom Bennett was a prominent force in town who managed the Mercantile Bank and owned the baseball team. Carol, of course, had married Dale Stedford, the town's doctor and Roger's younger brother, and around it went, a bit of old blood, and a bit of new blood, and all the good blood. Mayor Ed was chipper and glad-handy, and no worse for the wear from his time at the bar the night before. Dale was reintroduced to me in the company of Roger's wife, Mary Beth, along with the church preacher himself, a gloriously christened Pastor Llewellyn McCampbell. He was a giant in flowing vestments and a mighty red beard. Outwardly as intimidating as a war-crazed Scottish Highlander, his disposition was that of hearty cheerfulness. I immediately liked him. My reputation must have preceded me, for my conversations on the church steps centered on the excitement of a coming circus, of gold and silver and bronze licenses, of the prospect of handsome profits that could be transformed into a heart's desire. New bleachers for the concession stands in the ballpark, a revitalized storefront, a rebuilt auction barn on the fairgrounds. Yes, 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 and yes. And while handing out my cards, I gave assurances that if our show decided to set stakes in this most fair of towns, we would do so with the utmost of respect. Our aim was to delight and to entertain. Our performances were meant to amaze and bring wonder. Our sincerest desire was to be a good citizen while we neighbored here among them. These pledges were warmly received, and somewhere in the mix I lost Roger and found myself whirling in an eddy of steely-eyed church ladies. They were intent on a new roof for the church. Bake sales and charity auctions were their game, and they were determined to have a gold license for the price of a bronze. I begged away from their demands while giving each lady a compliment that was like a love letter sealed with a promise and a kiss. And indeed, it is a pleasure to remark honestly upon the refinements that a lady presents in public, a clever combination of jewelry and lace, a delicate set of a hat, an astute choice of handbag and shoes. These tokens of regard are currency that earns interest over time, and these ladies needed to encourage the menfolk to buy in, and buy in big when the proper time came. It was about this time I caught sight of her, Janie. My heart pattered and became glad. And there she was on the steps, fresh and lovely, in a lemony dress, crowned by a honey-spun play of light. Her company was a clutch of now familiar womenfolk, Ruth and Mary Beth and Carol. And with difficulty, I extracted myself from the cabal of church ladies, but before I could reach Janie and proffer my apologies for my boorish behavior the night before and present her with my fair tokens of regard, I was waylaid by a slack-faced gent who was intent on selling me a trained hog that could dance the two-step and count to 5, a marvelous beast and a surefire sensation in the center ring. I was luckily rescued by Roger. The call to worship had been sounded, and the service was about to start. We were ushered into a sanctuary that was steeped in a sweet brew of organ music. Opposing banks of stained glass featured simple compositions that suggested shepherds and lambs and fields of grain. Roger had folded me into the core of the Stedford family, and we took our place in a single pew near the front by the pulpit. I felt the easy weight of many eyes settling on me as I took my place. The Stedford men had done their best to ensure I was kept at a respectable distance from Janie, and in so doing steer aside any notion of scandal. But the pew had a gentle curve to it, and with a bit of discreet maneuvering, I could catch sight of her past my companions, Ed and Dale and Roger, and then Mary Beth and Ruth and Carol and finally Janie. She was unaccompanied by a suitable man. That discovery encouraged my ambitions, and though I could not help but scan the rows behind and pick through the congregation that fanned out in a multitude of adults and children, and their children, cousins, and so on, the omens were good. And so I turned my attention to the choir who, in splendid robes, were being led in song by an organist who was heavy with child. She bore a striking resemblance to Janie, a sister evidently. I wondered who her husband might be and where he might be hiding, though I suspected he was somewhere nearby in plain sight. The service began and I settled into it. Though unsure of the rites and rituals, following along was easy enough. I sat and listened with interest. I stood and bowed with reverence. I sang hymns with my voice unabashed. Pastor Lou, for that was what everyone called him, was in possession of a classically trained singing voice that flew with the lightness of a morning dove. The organist was deft, and their musicianship together was so practiced and devoted that I began to suspect they might be preacher and wife. Indeed, a man of the cloth would be a dandy feather in the cap of a family so prominent as the Stedfords. A quartet of ushers were called to the altar. Holy words were uttered. Soft chords flowed from the organ, and the ushers gathered up golden plates and descended into the congregation. Wallets and handbags were opened. Bills and folded checks were produced. Plates were passed. One must give in order to get, and with the casual generosity of a wealthy man, I dug into what remained of my meager riches. The bills burned as they slid from my fingers, and as the plate drifted away, Dale and Ed and Roger regarded the quality of my contribution with the raised eyebrows of approval. The act of willfully impoverishing myself left my spirits in a fretful state. From the pulpit, Pastor Lou read a passage from the book of Psalms. It was a lyric that celebrated fields that grow plenty with grain, of rolling hills fertile with crops, of cities as filled with people as grass covers a pasture, but only because the King reigns famous and the people remember his name and are blessed through him. The good pastor then began a sermon which seemed also to be under the sway of an optimistic muse. And in my wretched state, I found myself drawn to his message. Like stalks of corn in a spring field, we find safe harbor if we are planted side by side. Come storms or hard weather, we stand strong because we stand together. With the right dose of water and good soil and a bit of luck, we outgrow the weeds, but we are not alone to fend for ourselves, for our field is tended by the good farmer. With steadfast help from his most patient hand, we withstand the rot and the pests and grow thick and tall. And when the moon is ripe, we become fruitful and multiply. Our season done, we then retire so that the next generation may stand in our place. As for the good farmer, well, he persists apart from us even as he walks among the rows. Through him, you learn to appreciate your place as you take root in the spot assigned to you. You'll learn that there is no need to wonder what the next row is like, because it is simply another row in the same field, and you'll learn to give your neighbor his room, even as you lean upon him too. As a good pastor recited verses of Holy Scripture to consecrate his message, my mood darkened and turned reflective. The good pastor was only speaking half the truth. For there are some seeds that fall outside the blessed field, seeds that are forced to take root in a soil that is hard and poor. Only the meanest weeds can grow there, and like weeds, we are vicious and opportunistic and thorny. We thrive on hateful ground. Our fruits are poisonous. We force ourselves into improbable cracks and hold on as day becomes night and becomes day again and another day and just one more day for years on end. Beyond a dim horizon far behind me, bent through the prism of time, again I listened to the thin soles of my leather shoes as they ground across a cindered earth that glittered with metallic luster. And I was returned to anthracite coal country, dreary under the sooty shadows of the endless mountains, and a procession of ghosts, dimly seen and vaguely recalled. A crowded house, narrow and tall, grimy to the touch. Too many miles, never enough, save for the drink in the belt. If it was needed, it was not to be had. It was a threadbare upbringing of hand-me-downs with seat bottoms worn smooth. It was a black future of mine shafts and boot camps and battlefields, school days with no expectations, bare-knuckle ball games that ended with bloody noses, odd jobs and rotten pool halls, and a basic education in the arts of hustling. And when I hit draft age, my destiny clarified. I could greet Uncle Sam with a dutiful salute, or I could press my luck and dodge. I had never been one for the brotherhood of secret handshakes, and military life held little appeal to me. And though I'm a nonconformist, I am not a loner. And so I sought my fortune in the company of kindred spirits. Reborn to a new life on the road, I sang for my suppers and partook from the common pot, a mulligan stew of faces and names, partners and confederates, dupes and ne'er-do-wells, marks and suckers. It was a carnival of fun for a fun guy like me. Amazingly, the war and the draft ended before my number came up. It was a sweet bit of luck, a lottery ticket I was happy to toss. And when my partners had trouble fixing some AA ball games back in Ohio, I figured to change our luck by working an angle on the inside of the diamond. So I walked on and tried out. To my surprise, I earned a spot on the infield at shortstop. I had always been a good glove man on the seam, and it turned out that sandlots in high school had been good for something. It turned out, too, that the boys in the dugout were a wholesome lot. These disciples in the Church of Baseball performed their devotions with piety and wanted only to play a straight ball on the trajectory up to the heavens in the big leagues. Anyway, they didn't dare slow their reputations, so I played along and bided my time. But when you change your partners, you change your life. And soon enough, their good spirit infected me. My ambitions changed accordingly, and I began to believe I was a real ball player. I kicked loose my crooked confederates like knocking dirt from my cleats, and I imagined my place in the lineup at Riverfront Stadium as a part of the big red machine. Dreisen at first, Morgan at second, Parsons at shortstop, Rose at third, bench at home. I began to concoct a reputable life that went with it, and the feeling was wonderful. Because in that version of reality, I was a man of rare talent, a man of wholesome accomplishments, a man worthy of respect, even love. Now the illusion didn't last. With the few short seasons I was out, the reason was simple, the truth obvious. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how hard I played, I would always be in possession of a good bat, but not a great bat, a clear eye, but not a keen one. But even if I was a step too slow, I had hustle. Even if my bat was a touch sluggish, I had the nerve to crowd the plate and take a hard beating. Like a weed cut down, I sprouted again, though I had been touched by hope and was now colored by it. When you're born on the hard-packed grid of foul ball territory, you have to cheat a little to get yourself into fair ground. But once you're on base and playing ball, why, the rules of the game state you can steal yourself all the way home if you dare. I came back to myself in the sanctuary. The service was concluding with a prayer to the good farmer that he might accept our most humble observances. And I wondered, maybe a pernicious weed like me could be reborn again one last time. Maybe I too could take root in the place assigned to me by the loving hand of the good farmer himself. And with an aching heart, I yearned for my place in a road blessed with sweet waters and fertile soils. And there she was, Janie, a picture of loveliness, the embodiment of hope itself. Pastor Luke called us to the fellowship of song, and I took my place in the row and stood tall. As we rubbed shoulders and leaned upon one another, Janie looked over at me. Her eyes met mine. Her gaze clung to me. An inquiry, a hailing, an invitation. And my heart filled to overflowing, and I raised my voice in praise.